Sirima Ratwatte Dias Bandaranaike, commonly known as Sirimavo Bandaranaike, was a Sri Lankan stateswoman and politician and the modern world's first female head of government. She served as Prime Minister of Ceylon and Sri Lanka 3 times, 1960–65, 1970–77 and 1994–2000, and was a long-time leader of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. Bandaranaike was the widow of a previous Sri Lankan Prime Minister, Solomon Bandaranaike, and the mother of Sri Lanka's 4th executive president, Chandrika Kumaratunga, as well as Anura Bandaranaike, a former speaker and cabinet minister. Early life. Sirimavo Bandaranaike was born on 17 April 1916, as Sirima Ratwatte to a prominent Radila family, who were descended from Ratwatte Dias of Matale, a signatory on behalf of the Sinhalese to the Kandyan Convention of 1815. Born to Barnes Ratwatte, Disawa of Sabaragamuwa and Rosalind Maharelatana Kumarahami of Maharelatana Warawa, Balangada, she was the eldest of 6, with 4 brothers and 1 sister. Her father was member of the State Council and the Senate of Ceylon. Her brothers were Justice Barnes Ratwatte II, Dr. Sivla Ratwatte, Dr. Maki Ratwatte and Clifford Ratwatte, former Member of Parliament for Balangada and Chairman of the State Plantations and Sri Lanka Tea Board. Her youngest sister Patsy Ratwatte was married to Colonel Edward James de Vitatawala, who established the Central Command of the Ceylon Army. Bandaranaike was educated at St. Bridget's Convent, Colombo, but was a practicing Buddhist. In 1940 she married Solomon Ratwatte Dias Bandaranaike, a member of the State Council and son of Sir Solomon Dias Bandaranaike, the Mahamudalya. They had 3 children, son of Chandrika and Anura. Political career. Husband's premiership. Her husband Solomon was a founding member of the United National Party in 1946 and was elected to the House of Representatives in the first elections of the Dominion of Ceylon in 1947. Breaking away from the UNP, he went on to form the Sri Lanka Freedom Party and became its leader. A coalition led by the SLFP won a majority in the House of Representatives in 1956 general election and Solomon became Prime Minister, after initiating much change on socialist and nationalistic lines. He had his tenure cut short 3 years later when he was assassinated by a Buddhist monk on the 26th of September 1959. The assassination created a power vacuum, due to Solomon's likely successor C.P. de Silva being gravely ill and in London for treatment at the time. Wijayananda Dhanayake, Minister of Education, was appointed caretaker Prime Minister. Turmoil in the government followed as Dhanayake sacked and appointed ministers. This led to a defeat of the SLFP in the March 1960 elections. First term. During this time Sirimavo was brought forward as legitimate successor to her husband's party leadership and she entered politics. In 1960 M.P. Desoiza Jr. stepped down from his seat in the Senate, paving the way for Sirimavo to be appointed as a member of the Senate from the SLFP. She led her party to win the July 1960 elections on the pledge to continue her husband's policies, notably the Sinhala-only Act, and to proceed with repatriation of the estate Tamils to India. On the 21st of July 1960, as a senator she became Prime Minister, thus becoming the first female Prime Minister in the world. Known to her fellow Sri Lankans as Mrs. B, she could skillfully use appeals to the electorates as she promised to continue her assassinated husband's work. Her opponents and critics called her the Weeping Widow, saying she got herself nominated a senator and made head of her husband's party after his death by making capital out of his death, going around to different villages and weeping over the children. Bandaranaike was a socialist who continued her husband's policies of nationalizing key sectors of the economy, such as banking and insurance, and also nationalizing all schools then owned by the Roman Catholic Church in 1961. Bandaranaike was on a roller coaster ride from the moment she took office. Within a year of her 1960 election victory, she declared a state of emergency. This followed a civil disobedience campaign by part of the country's minority Tamil population who were outraged by her decision to drop English as an official language and her order to conduct all government business in Sinhala, the language of the majority Sinhalese. This they considered a highly discriminatory act and an attempt to deny Tamils access to all official posts and the law. This led to an increase in Tamil militancy which escalated under succeeding administrations. Further problems arose with the state takeover of foreign businesses, particularly petroleum companies, which upset the United States and Britain. They ended aid to Sri Lanka. As a result, Bandaranaike moved her country closer to China and the Soviet Union and championed a policy of non-alignment. At home, she crushed an attempted military coup by Christian officers in 1962 and appointed her uncle William Gopal Governor-General of Ceylon. In 1964, she entered into a historic coalition with the Marxist Lanka Sami Samaja Party. At the end of 1964, she lost a vote of confidence. The SLFP coalition was defeated in the 1965 elections, ending her first term as Prime Minister. Pact with India. Under the terms of the 1964 agreement with India, 600,000 Indian Tamils were to be repatriated, while 375,000 were to be granted Sri Lankan citizenship. By the 31st of October 1981, when the two countries were to have settled this issue, India had taken more than 300,000 persons as repatriates. Sri Lanka had granted citizenship to over 185,000 plus over 62,000 post-1964 offspring, over 207,000 Indian Tamils in Sri Lanka before 1964, plus nearly 45,000 offspring, were granted Indian citizenship but still awaited repatriation. In the wake of the July 1983 anti-Tamil violence, some in this latter group are being processed for repatriation or have emigrated to India. With the lapse of the 1964 agreement, India declined to consider any more applications for citizenship. The government of Sri Lanka believes that the 1964 pact remains in force until the citizenship cases and permanent residence of all Indian Tamils covered by the pact have been settled. The All-Party Conference has agreed that the government should grant Sri Lankan citizenship to stateless Indian Tamils who did not apply for Indian citizenship and were not granted Sri Lankan citizenship under the 1964 agreement. Second term. She regained power after the United Front coalition won the 1970 elections with a large majority, but after just 16 months in power, the government was almost toppled by the 1971 JVP insurrection of left-wing youths. Bandaranaike had disbanded the government's intelligence service, suspecting that it was loyal to the opposition United National Party. Thus there was no warning of the uprising, and Sri Lanka's small army was caught off guard. The army mobilized its reserves and held the capital, but some outlying areas were occupied by the insurgents. The government was saved by military aid from both India and Pakistan, thanks to Bandaranaike's skillful foreign policy. In those tough political years, she turned herself into a formidable leader. She was the only man in her cabinet. One of her officials commented during the height of the insurgency. Her second term saw a new constitution introduced in 1972, replacing the Solberry Constitution. Ceylon was renamed Sri Lanka and became a republic. The 1973 oil crisis had a traumatic effect on the Sri Lankan economy. The government had no access to Western aid and her socialist policies stifled economic activity. Rationing had to be imposed. Bandaranaike became more and more intolerant of criticism and forced the shutdown of the independent newspaper group, whose publications were her fiercest critics. Earlier she had nationalized the country's largest newspaper, Lakehouse, which has remained the government's official mouthpiece. Bandaranaike enjoyed continued success in foreign affairs. She was chosen chairwoman of the non-aligned movement in 1976, and hosted the movement's conference, attended by numerous heads of state. Despite her high international standing, she was losing Sri Lankan support rapidly amid allegations of corruption and against the background of a rapidly declining economy. Under the Salisbury Constitution, election would have been held in 1975. However, the government had become very unpopular. Bandaranaike used a clause of the 1972 constitution to delay elections until 1977. This did not help, and in the 1977 elections the United Front was routed, winning only 8 seats. Opposition Bandaranaike held her own seat in 1977, but in 1980, she was charged with abuse of power for the 1975-77 delay in elections. She was expelled from Parliament and banned from public office for 7 years. The 1980s were her dark days. She became a political outcast, rejected by the people who had once worshipped her. Bandaranaike spent the next 17 years in opposition, warding off challenges to her leadership of the SLFP, even from her own children. Always the politician, she played her ambitious daughter Chandrika and son Anura against one another, holding on to party control despite losing every subsequent general election. Third term in 1994, the SLFP-led coalition won the general elections. Chandrika then outmaneuvered her mother to become Prime Minister, and then was elected President the same year. Bandaranaike became Prime Minister again, but the constitution had changed since her last tenure. As Prime Minister, she was now subordinate to her daughter, the President. She remained in office till a few months before her death, but had little real power. She died on Election Day, the 10th of October 2000, after having cast her vote for the last time.